Large processors are valuable. They create jobs, investment, and market demand. But if they become the city's entire development strategy, the local economy becomes dependent on them. This harms our city in several ways. First, it narrows what our local farming is allowed to become. When economic development is built around processors, farmers are not supported as entrepreneurs or business owners. They're seen as just suppliers. Grants, incentives, contracts, and all support point in the same direction. Grow this crop, keep this processor supplied. So even if the city says it supports agriculture, it really supports contract agriculture that feeds processor demand. Not farmer owned brands, not farmer led processing, or any new agricultural business models. A real farm centered economy should give farmers more ways to capture value from a base they created. Second, it weakens farmer leverage and creates buyer concentration. Look at the market structure. When there are only a few dominant processors, farmers are not operating in an open market. If the farmer's choice is to accept the buyer's terms or find another buyer hundreds of kilometers away, if farmers have to leave the local economy to find market leverage, then the local economy does not support farmers. Farmers do not gain power when their work is celebrated. They gain power when they have more options. This creates a political problem too, because economic dependence becomes political dependence. Once a city becomes economically dependent on a few major processors for jobs, a tax base, investment announcements, and public confidence, the city becomes politically dependent on them too. The processor is not just another business in Portage anymore. It becomes a relationship that the city is afraid to lose because their entire economic identity depends on them being here. So instead of focusing on building economic conditions that strengthen our local production value, the city focuses on keeping the processors here. This is not the processor's fault at all. Processors are just private companies. Their job is to run their business, protect their margins, and make decisions that serve their company. A processor invests in Portage for its own business, not to complete the city's economic goals. A processor's job is not to create local ownership. A processor's job is not to diversify the city's economy. A processor's job is not to create more career pathways for young people or to make sure that farmers have more leverage. A processor's job is not to build the next layer of the economy. All of those are the city's economic responsibility. That is why when the city treats processor attraction as the main strategy, it is outsourcing its own responsibility to build the economy. Third, farm dependence reduces the attention that should be going into local diversification. A city does not just spend money, it spends attention, staff time, political energy, planning capacity, relationships, incentives, and public imagination. When one sector dominates all of that, other sectors do not get built. For Portage, agri-processing is treated as the default economic identity. So the system keeps returning to the same questions. How do we promote the existing agri-processing base? How do we attract more processors? How do we brand Portage as an agricultural hub? Those are not bad questions, but they are not enough because every hour spent only promoting the existing economy is an hour not spent building the next one. That is how city stagnation happens. Fourth, it increases outmigration. If young people look at Portage and only see a few realistic paths, farming, processing, retail, healthcare, government work, or leaving, then leaving becomes a logical decision. It's not because they hate their community, it's because they cannot see enough futures here. Portage talks about population growth, youth retention, and the need to keep people from leaving. But people don't stay because of a speech. They stay when they can imagine a real life, a real career, a real future here. In other cities, a person can imagine building a career in technology, media, design, finance, architecture, research, business, marketing, film, policy, trades, entrepreneurship. Portage doesn't have all of that. Not everyone wants to leave Portage, but other cities have economies with more diverse businesses, which gives people more ways to imagine who they could become. So all Portage has to do is build the conditions for newer, different economies. New economies create new kinds of businesses. New kinds of businesses create new kinds of jobs. Not just more jobs, more kinds of jobs. New kinds of jobs create new reasons to stay. That is why population retention is not a housing issue. It's not a marketing issue, and it's definitely not a people need to appreciate their community issue. It is an economic development issue. If the city of Portage wants people to stay, it has to build a city where more kinds of futures are possible.